First up is Mike Crimmins from the Department of Soil, Water, and Environmental Science. Mike is also a climate extension specialist. He's a professor in soil, water, and environmental science, and a climate extension specialist.
So that didn't count against my 15 minutes. Okay, good. See,
you
farmed up this stuff. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. So I'm actually going to show some results again, and some of you were here in the spring, and I'm going to show you a little bit about this, because this is, what we're doing is taking some existing results from a project that Dan and I and others have worked on with NOAA NIDIS funding over the past couple of years, and we're now pivoting towards making this into a CLIMAS project and extending it to some other applications. And so what we're talking about is evaluating existing and developing new drought indices using modeled soil moisture time series. Okay, so the first sort of pitch, and I'm going to do several slides here to try to make my case of why I think this is particularly useful, is in my job, I spend a lot of time in trying to engage sort of stakeholders or other folks in evaluating current drought conditions and then anticipating how drought conditions may change over time. And I've been doing this for about 12 years in this particular job. And the elements of tracking drought here in the Southwest are really kind of nuanced and fairly complicated. And so there's always this question, and this question is going to come up in the presentation I'm giving next week, the HELA State of the Watershed, and there's this question of, is the drought over? And it depends. And it's always, it depends. It depends on who you are and what you're worried about and what kind of water you're worried about. So drought is very contextual. So some of the elements here that I think really make it important that we gloss over is that we live in a seasonal transitional climate. I think we tried to make this case when we did the re-proposal for CLIMAS, is that this seasonality is really a hallmark of both the uniqueness and the biodiversity, as you see in this map up on the left here, and part of tracking interannual variability is because we see we have wet years and dry years, but it really does depend on whether or not you're talking about winter or summer precipitation. And all the sectors then are attached sometimes specifically to whether or not it's raining or snowing in the winter, which then feeds water resources, or if you're really thinking about ecosystem responses, many of our ecosystems are summer dominated. And so if you don't pay attention to those elements, you really get confused as to what you're talking about when we're talking about drought. And then the background condition of warming temperatures and sort of the climate change signal in the background is making it even harder, because we're sort of driving drought intensity, we believe, but we're doing it in complicated ways, which I don't think we completely understand. I think the connection to water resources is much more straightforward than it is to the specific ecosystems that we try to manage down here. And then you get into situations like this, where we will engage through the climate outlook that Ben puts out, and our podcasts, and just interactions with folks on the phone or going to meetings and trying to put up maps like this. And really, the portrayal of drought depends on which map you put up. And so this is the West Side Drought Tracker, and this actually expands out these little files and makes over 100 different flavors of drought indices at once. And so you can click around these and create a story. And I feel like we can do better than that. And you get, here's a situation just from this particular summer. These are 4 different maps, standardized precipitation index, which is one I think we've all sort of gravitated towards. It's real simple, just deviation from the long-term average for different timescales. The Palmer Drought Severity Index, which is sort of favorite over time, which incorporates a simple water balance. Standardized precipitation minus evapotranspiration index, which has temperature in there, which clearly looks worse when it's warm. And then a longer season standardized precipitation index. And so if you're looking at different parts of the state, you can kind of see some places are hanging together, but a lot of places aren't. They've actually gone in different directions. So what do you do in that situation? And that really is a question that we're trying to answer, is what do you do in that situation? And our informing operational drought monitoring, we've done a lot of this in several of us in the room have worked together in different projects where we're helping tribal drought plan or helping the governor's drought task force, is what index do I use and at what time scale, and how do I operationally trigger a drought response, and then how do I say a drought is over? We can't do that right now in any meaningful way. We really need is some historical impact data, and that has been mythical on a lot of our projects. Sometimes it's easier to go back to stream flow data if you're dealing with water resources. That's fairly clear and straightforward, reservoir levels. Once you get out into a land management situation, it's tough. You maybe use satellite data that's fairly limited. you're not sure what species you're thinking about. Trees have a different response than grasses, and so it becomes really challenging. So the data don't often exist, so what do we do? So what we've been trying to do, and this was what I presented in the spring, is what if we were to create an objective data set by using a soil moisture model? So take something really complicated and does daily water balance modeling, and then make a long-term data set, and then just pretend it's a good proxy as an impact that we can then go back and then compare our drought indices to. Because again, the temptation is to create another drought index, but we have too many as it is. Can we just use the existing ones better? And I believe that we can. Soil moisture data is limited. We have very short-term records, and we start playing with the data. It's kind of junky, doesn't work very well, and doesn't have very good historical context. And we know that a lot of these drought indices are trying to do soil moisture, but they do them in varying quality. And so our objective is to go back into those drought indices and see if we can tease out kind of the best ones that work for the seasonal transitional climate of the Southwest and work under different conditions. And so that's what we've done. And I'll just show you a couple of quick results because this is the context for what we're planning to do in the future. We're using Hydrus 1D soil water model, does daily water balance modeling, and we've got it set up fairly simply right now. We've done it for 4 study sites. This is a paper we're trying to write up right now. And it makes these really cool plots. This is depth in the soil, and then this is every day from 1950 to 2012. And you can see it's kind of hard to see on this particular map. But these are little precip events, and it's putting down soil water pulses into the soil column. And you can see most of the fun is above 170 meters. We've got very simple rudimentary root systems and plants pulling water out in very simple rudimentary soil profiles. But it is way more complex in that daily water balance than, say, standardized precipitation index, which is literally just a bunch of water in a rain gauge, and you sort of look at the total over different timescales. So there's something useful there, but how does it actually relate to the soil moisture variability? So we make indices like this, so this is then converting that daily variability into a monthly soil moisture index. And again, not to use this as the operational drought index, but to use it to compare against something that's easily attainable from the web, like that 6-month standardized precipitation index, which is a 6-month window moving along through the historical record. You can see that it's actually smearing across seasons and giving us an indication of, in that 6-month window, whether or not that was dry or wet relative to the historical record. And then our soil moisture model is then taking monthly averages and then trying to see if it's coming up with a similar answer. And so what we're trying to do is look for those similar timescales and depths and correlations between these drought indices. So just to give you, so we did this for 3 different depths, 4 different locations for standardized precipitation index and standardized precipitation minus evapotranspiration index, super mouthful, from 1 to 48 months. So there's over 792 different permutations looking at different combinations of these indices. So this is just one set of results here. It's both the SPI and SPEI at 10 centimeters and at this time scale. So this simply says is that 2 months, there's the best correlation between SPI and SPEI versus that shallow soil moisture. So there's a peak right there. So what it's basically saying, what we believe is that the complex water balance solved by the soil moisture model is peaking in correlation with a simple 2-month window moving forward, which kind of makes sense, right? It's interesting it's not 1 month, and it's interesting it's not 3. 2 seems to work for this soil type and our specification of roots. The other interesting thing that I think that we really want to understand here is that the addition of temperature with SPEI does not correlate more than just the simple SPEI. So there's more information, the temperature variability in SPEI, but SPI does a better job of tracking the daily soil water balance on a monthly basis. So this means that SPEI, we believe, has that temperature component in there, is not necessarily giving us more information or maybe giving us confusing information. So our drought indices, when we're trying to use in tracking climate change, may not be working the way that we think they're working. And this is what we want to try to push on a little bit more, because it's still an important part of it. The drought indices might be sort of distracting us right now with the temperature increases. This is a heat map, and what we like to think about of this particular graph here, so this is now every month versus the different time scale by the month here. So it's a roadmap Yes, I'm sorry.
Jargon watch.
Jargon watch, yes.
Heat map is not a thing that people.
I'm sorry, heat map is not a
use
thing.
a real.
I use it at the dinner table at least
People
2
think
or 3
it's
times.
yes,
Sorry.
temperature.
Okay. Okay, so this is a visualization of correlations, and every one of the combinations here was a correlation of 66 combinations of years in depth and month and correlated. So
I'm part of this.
Okay,
I understand.
okay, good. I just want to make sure. Okay, thank you. That was a really good. You're going to use it this weekend.
Okay. Around the dinner table.
Around the dinner table, the heat map here. Okay, so this maybe we can use a roadmap to figuring out what's the highest correlating drought index in a particular month. This, I think, is really handy now as I'm on the Governor Drought Task Force, is as we go through the year, the highest correlating month actually jumps around a little bit, and there's a weak spot in the spring. We kind of know that, is when we get into the spring, it's not raining, we're not sure what's going on, so that gives us a feel for what's going on. And this, what we're going to try to do is extend, as I'm going to show you what we're doing going forward, is that this can help us, give us a playbook of how to use these different drought indices when and which one to try to point back to what we think is going on in the soil moisture variability. Here's an example of tracking these indices together, and just to point out that they do kind of follow each other, which is those high correlations, but there's deviations from what soil moisture says and what these indices do. Sometimes SPI and SPEI go in opposite directions. Sometimes they just completely go off the rails from what's in soil moisture. And we see events like this, which is what we're going to try to do going forward, is push on is where we have situations. This is spring of 2006, where a small March event caused the drought indices to improve, which was giving us an indication that that March was actually beneficial rain. Soil moisture did not care. It was going through the dry season. It was the type of event that still had a lot of evapotranspiration problem with it. And we've seen in the vegetation impacts that this is indeed an event that went the wrong direction with the drought indices and would have done better with soil moisture. So going forward, it's to really understand those kinds of events better and to really now lock it down with actual data on the ground. So is this a good approach? We think it is. We need to understand this a little bit more. We're going to do that against testing against long-term vegetation monitoring data and actual soil moisture records, which we've done a little bit of this summer, and then start to really play with the model to see if we can come up with an optimal setup that works for the Southwest that can then help us even more informed way point back to that selection of drought indices. I don't think we're trying to develop a new drought index. We may end up getting to 2 years and going, whoops, we made a drought index. But if it works better, maybe that's useful. In particular, we're partnering with the Nature Conservancy here in Tucson in a study effort that they've done down at the Los Cienegos Natural Conservation Area. Gita Bodner and Marcos Robles have done some really cool long-term monitoring there and wrote up this particular paper where they're really wrestling with seeing drought impacts on the grasslands in Southwest Arizona. And we've had discussions about, well, how do we operationally monitor and anticipate changes to the grasslands in a real-time manner? And that's where we've connected here. And then can we get to the next step is anticipating and then responding to it in a management perspective, which would be don't do prescribed burns this year, do them this year, change grazing management, or really go heavy on conservation of certain areas because the drought is of a particular magnitude. Too much, but I just want to show you the thinking that we're trying to play with, which is work at Los Cienegos, take daily climate data, do what we've done, calculate drought indices, and then the additional part is now to compare it to actual monitoring data on the ground, where we see incidents like 2006, where the drought indices went the opposite direction. They have impacts that show that soil moisture probably would have been a better metric than just thinking about precip, and then maybe that helps us understand the temperature and precipitation interactions that occur through soil moisture. So if all goes well, we'll have a better understanding of all these things fit together, and then using it, hopefully then to extend it out, that we do have best practices on how to use this information. So the last slide here is the extending to applications. What we want to try to do is, I think what we can do is do the mashup of data of having the tools like West-Wide Drought Tracker, which are those maps I showed you earlier. If they're used in combination with the thinking of, say, soil texture maps or ecological site descriptions, which is what managers are already using in their management plans, that you could point to the specific drought index that probably captures the variability of potential soil moisture better like a 1 versus a 3 versus a 6, based on where you're trying to manage across the landscape. Because soil texture is going to be that memory that's going to control how quickly or how long the antecedent impacts are of a particular drought event. And what we've noticed, and I forgot to say at the beginning, Trevor McKellar is the grad student who did all this work. And the previous year, he's not here. I told him if he wasn't here, he was going to get thrown under the bus. So he's doing this work going forward. And he and I were talking about this, is that what we've seen in the results so far is that it could be, as you go month to month, you're using different windows. As you get to May, you actually need to think about the previous the previous fall and winter. And when you get to the monsoon, you're just worried about monsoon. So it's really thinking about timescales in a much more nuanced way rather than just running with one index. And then maybe we end up accidentally creating an index at the end. If it works better, this will be part of our effort, is to understand if that was a useful endeavor. So that's it.
Thanks, Mike. We have time for maybe a quick question for Dr. Crimmins.
Bill.
17 years where we've had less rain in August than we've had in July. Now 18 years. Is this global climate change? Does it reflect it in your soil indices?
It will show up in our soil indices. I don't know if it's climate change, because one study that was looking at projections actually showed the projections showing the exact opposite. So if you look at the CMIT model, a couple modeling comparison project, models in the future actually have much later monsoon starts and extension in October. We've seen the opposite. So I don't think we have that dialed in at all. And I don't think we know why what's happening is happening right now.
Thank you.
Connie?
Oh, this may be obvious, but it just seems like you kind of have to like go out there and measure the soil moisture in a bunch of different places to really make this all make
The
sense.
calibration part of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting your faith into one model,
Yes.
and you're going to be monitoring soil moisture at one place, and then you're mentioning the soil texture is different.
Mm-hmm. So we did a summer of calibration studies against actual soil moisture monitoring. So that's what we did this last summer, Trevor did.
Mm-hmm.
And what we find is that Climate Reference Network Station out at Desert Museum has soil moisture monitor, and there's one out at Elgin, which is near Los Angeles. And we find that the model can replicate things that's slightly offset. And what we're finding is that the soil moisture monitoring that's actually at these sites is uncalibrated. So the data the data at face value in the monitoring in the environment is not useful. And so now we're kind of left with, maybe the truth is in the middle. And you're right. And so what we hope is that the vegetation monitoring, which is the actual impact anyways, gives us, maybe that will be the truth that really is the test of this. But you're right, we're in a bit of a circular bind right here. And every direction we kind of attack it, I think that now trying to get with actual data on the ground will be hopefully the saving grace. I don't know.
Well, to be clear, every time we met with the Nature Conservancy, who is now our partner on this project, Marcos and Gita came to Trevor's defense actually for his master's thesis. And literally Gita was like, that seems like it could be crap. How do you know your model's not lying? And so, we've been keenly aware of this problem.
Yeah.
But it's not like there's some beautifully, as you know, it's not like there's some amazing network.
If you have a network, it's really hard to monitor what depth.
That's right, what's that? And so I think that better attention to soils, and Craig, thanks for showing up, our pedologist who's going to keep us honest on this stuff, is thinking about soils across the landscape, I think is going to be a real helpful thing. And it's going to help us think about where water is and where it should be and where it isn't within droughts. We still probably won't really be able to know exactly what the soil moisture is.
Oh, let's stop right there.
Okay.
Okay.
Keep an eye on us.
Sorry, I need to
keep us honest through this process.